This is a video for rhetorical analysis where we will go over reading and writing strategies with a minimalist approach. The minimalist approach means that we will only look at the things that are most important for us to consider as we try to respond to a rhetorical analysis question. So the prompt we're working with is a Barbara Jordan speech from 1974. We're going to explain the compositional choices that Barbara Jordan makes in this speech to help build her argument. And the things we need to consider are the speaker, the audience, and the occasion, and the type of writing, which in this case is an argument. So to do that, we have to go look into Barbara Jordan's background a little bit. She is a congresswoman from Texas. She spoke in this particular occasion in 1974 in front of the House Judiciary Committee, and so the topic of her speech is surrounding the impeachment of President Nixon. So if we look back at our prompt, knowing who Barbara Jordan is a little bit and what she might be talking about in regards to the impeachment of a president of the United States, we should be looking in her argument to find a claim. And we should be looking before she states her claim to see how she opens it up or introduces it. We should also look at her reasoning that follows after her claim, and then if there's any sort of call to action or closing arguments at the end. And so before we look at her speech directly, I want to go over a reading strategy that I think will help. Say, do, imply, or SDI. It's really important when you're reading and trying to annotate that you spend only as much time as you need writing stuff down and marking things. If you spend the whole time in a timed writing situation like on the SAT or the AP exam looking for all the Easter eggs, you're going to run out of time. You're not going to have time to do your response. And so here's an easy way to kind of test what's going to be useful and what's not. And so the hint is to look for implications. These are the deepest levels of meaning. Most of the things you'll find is surface level. This is stuff that might be general facts, background, or clearly stated direct opinion, but other than just simply existing, it doesn't have much analysis to go with it. What you want to try to find is stuff that'll go a little bit deeper, stuff that the author or speaker has put in there deliberately to create a specific effect for the audience, something that you can explain how it works, and describe sort of the cause and effect relationship between what the author has done and how the audience should feel as a result. And finally, if you could do this with your evidence, you know you have a really good piece to talk about in your response. If you have a cause effect that you can also take a little bit deeper and kind of apply back to the author themselves and use that as a way to determine maybe a specific purpose or goal that they're trying to accomplish with their language, that will help too. So in the Barbara Jordan speech, we want to look for the things that is going to get the audience to think, feel, or do whatever it is that Barbara Jordan is arguing that they should think, feel, or do. Okay, so here she opens her speech by thanking the chairman and the other people in the House Judiciary Committee for letting her talk, which is pretty traditional and standard, so you can pretty much skip over that part. But as you get down a little bit further, she talks about the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. She kind of points out a little bit ironically that maybe she was left out by mistake when George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and many others discussed the rights of we the people. And so maybe she is an African American woman. This is something that, even though back when the Constitution was originally written, the rights weren't really designed for her, she is the one, after many amendments, interpretations, and court decisions, who is on stage putting these rights to display in this moment. And then in this third paragraph here, she talks about herself as being an inquisitor, and then she gets down here to the bottom where she talks about her faith in the Constitution as being whole, complete, and total. This document that gives our government its power, something she believes in, and she says she's not going to sit here and be an idle spectator to the diminution, the subversion, the destruction of the Constitution. And so this is her primary claim. And she, uses some rhetorical pacing strategies here. I'm sure there's lots of fancy terms you could throw out with diction and word choice and things like that. But quite honestly, I think it's really important right now for first read for us to just kind of get through what she's saying. So she moves on after stating her claim with a fairly logical approach. She takes this overview here on the next few parts and just kind of goes into checks and balances in general. And talks about how they are necessary and what they're for. Maybe this is certainly, I hope it's not to educate the people on the House Judiciary Committee. They should know how the government works. But for anybody that's out there in the public, maybe that this is for them to kind of understand what impeachment is, how the process works, that it's not simply, a group of 10 people getting together and telling the president that they're fired. All the branches of governments are involved. And so I think it's important background for her to lay out before she really gets into arguing what she wants to say. And I think you really see that context come into play here as she kind of gets towards the middle of her speech, where she talks about what was said at the Federal Convention of 1787. This is, the narrowly channeled exception to the separation of powers. And so the idea behind the whole thing is that we do not trust our liberty to a particular branch. We need one branch to check the other. So our government is based on freedom, but it is not free. And so I think that she brings this trust issue back to the forefront, where she kind of mentions it a little bit earlier. It's like trust by distrust. Checks and balances are in place. Like in this case, impeachment. It's not simply there because an executive is no longer trustworthy. It's the job of a liberated people to operate under this check and balance system to correct distrustful behavior before it blossoms into tyranny, to preserve that liberty that everybody is after in the first place. And now that she has finished kind of giving her little civics lesson at the beginning here, where she's going over checks and balances and why they're important, she starts talking about common sense. And so she's starting to bring some counter-argument into play here. She's saying that common sense would be revolted if we engaged in this for petty reasons. We are trying to be big because the task we have before us is a big one. She also is looking at some of the things that were said earlier in the hearing, that the evidence against the allegations, or basically the evidence supporting the allegations that Nixon has done something wrong, worth impeachment, is thin. Those are counter viewpoints. And so the way counter argument works is you have to outline the opponent's viewpoint without misrepresenting it, and then you have to discredit it. And she does that. The counter argument is that Nixon is only being challenged here because of petty reasons, and that the evidence against him in actuality is thin. She refutes this by going into detailed evidence against Nixon that is neither petty nor thin. She applies anaphora down here at the bottom. It's, she has these which includeds all over the place. I probably missed a few. That's okay. Anyways, she goes into that because what's really important is that she has refuted this claim that the evidence against Nixon was petty and thin with these very specific and detailed examples of where he has betrayed trust against the American people. And in this section, she basically kind of continues to outline counter-argument. She talks about how people say that Nixon maybe needs fair time to respond, but also points out that he had time the day before to respond. He's actually delayed the American people, holding them in a state of anxiety, waiting to see if he would obey an order from the Supreme Court of the United States. She goes into juxtaposition that she talks about here. She takes the impeachment criteria and juxtaposes it with the things that the president is being accused of and they have evidence of. And so really kind of at this point, building her case very strongly through counter argument, taking the things that Nixon and Nixon supporters are saying and discrediting them with actual evidence from other reputable sources. Okay, so here we are towards the end of the speech now. She's done a lot to counter-argue Nixon's defense. And so once she's kind of done that successfully, she moves in another direction. She starts following her counter-argument. And basically, she's established that Nixon has betrayed public trust. And so she sets a clear historical precedent in American history with what impeachable offenses are. And primary among those is this idea of betraying public trust. And it really kind of builds and builds and builds to this coup de grace down here at the bottom, where she says if the impeachment provision in the Constitution of the United States will not reach the offenses charged here, then perhaps the 18th century Constitution should be abandoned to a 20th century paper shredder. She's actually suggesting to the House Judiciary Committee that they take the U.S. Constitution and shred it if they can't seriously consider impeaching Nixon after what he's done here, because what she's trying to say is that if he can subvert trust and get away with it, then this whole document is worthless because it doesn't carry any weight. It's supposed to be able to stop him, and it's not. Very powerful moment. Okay, so we've done our cursory read through here, and I want to go and get ready for the writing. I want to explain how Barbara Jordan is using her choices, how she's making choices to build this argument. And so the claim that I'm going to work with today is that Barbara Jordan challenges any support of President Nixon during the 1974 impeachment hearings in the House Judiciary Committee by relating basic principles of the U.S. Constitution to the American public, and also appealing to a common sense of justice that, in this case, it's ironic, was not originally designed to apply to her. So we're going to break here and kind of switch to a new video. This one's going to focus, of course, on the reading strategies we've just looked at, which you need to go over it again. We're going to look at the reading strategy, say, do, imply. Going on those treasure hunts, looking for all the ascendanton and all that kind of stuff is great. But if all it does is allow you to make surface level observations, then it's really not going to be super helpful in your analysis. And so the things that we want to do is really find the moments where she shifts her audience and it goes deeper. And so the next video will look at how to take what annotation and very minimal notes we just took on the reading and put it into words.